It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. The Marc Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Marc is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Marc Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. Well, you can read any headline today or turn on any television news station and you'll read about the shutdown, the wall, the border crisis. President Trump and Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi are locked in a struggle over whether or not the government will fund President Trump's request of $5.7 billion to build the wall on our southern border with Mexico. And I'll start today's show with my opening statement, which will be my column recently published earlier this week in Penn Live and the Harrisburg Patriot News on this very issue. And then we'll open up the phone lines and we'll hear from our listeners, and they can opine on the crisis, the shutdown, and the national emergency, and whether or not we have a national emergency, and whether or not the president has the authority to dip into funds already appropriated for the purpose of military construction to build his border wall between the United States and Mexico. So during his first primetime address from the Oval Office on Tuesday night, President Trump implored congressional Democrats to give him $5.7 billion that he wants to build a wall along our nation's southern border. Democrats responded about how you'd expect them to in their rebuttal right after Trump's remarks. United States Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer, a Democrat from New York, and United States House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat from California, well, they didn't budge, and they dismissed the border wall as ineffective, unnecessary, and a waste. The president has said he'll declare a national emergency if Congress doesn't give him the money he wants, and he'll put the military to work to build the wall. He also said Mexico would indirectly fund its construction through the rebooted and yet to be ratified U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Act. But does the president have the legal authority to declare a national emergency? Well, those on the left, they say no. Well, in an opinion piece for the New York Times, which is kind of the intellectual leader of the left in the United States today, they published a piece by Yale University law professor Bruce Ackerman, who argued that the president doesn't have the authority to declare an emergency, and that if he did put soldiers to work building the wall, they would all be committing a federal crime. So that is the opinion of the Yale University Law School professor Bruce Ackerman, that the president and the soldiers that he puts to use on building a wall on our southern border would be committing a federal crime if they do so. Is he right? Would the president be committing a crime by using United States soldiers and monies appropriated to the Department of Defense to build the wall on the southern border? Well, the Yale law professor, he claims our long-standing legal tradition in this country is that the chief executive is prohibited from using the military to enforce domestic law. And that's true. The Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 makes it a crime to do so unless the president is authorized by the Constitution or Congress. But this claim, in my view, is a red herring. Building a wall is not enforcing domestic law. If a U.S. soldier places a steel post or a steel slat along our southern border, he's not enforcing domestic law. He's simply building a wall. The remainder of Ackerman's argument, this Yale law professor who has opined that the president would be committing a crime if he used the National Emergency Act to build a wall on our southern border, the remainder of his argument stems from that first fishy premise. He explains that although Congress granted, for example, the Coast Guard authorization to enforce domestic law in U.S. waters, There is no similar provision granting the other military services a comparable power to search, seize, and arrest along the Mexican border. My response to the Yale law professor in the New York Times is that the president is not talking about having the U.S. military search, seize, and arrest on the border. He's talking about having the military build a wall there. The Yale law professor continues. He explains that although Congress authorized the military to detain suspected members of Al Qaeda or the Taliban in the U.S., it is unconscionable. It's an unconscionable stretch to use this proviso to support using the military for operations against the desperate refugees from Central America seeking asylum in our country. Well, my response is that, again, the president is not talking about using the military to attack Central American refugees in Tijuana. He's talking about using the military to build a wall on our southern border. They're two different things. And lastly, the Yale law professor opines in the New York Times that the United States Supreme Court invalidated, for example, President Truman's attempt in 1952 to use his power as commander-in-chief to nationalize steel mills in the face of labor strikes. My response, but building a wall is not nationalizing a steel mill. Building a wall is not intervening in a labor dispute between the owners of steel mills and labor unions. The president will certainly have to take some private property to build the wall, but he's always had the authority to do that under eminent domain. So contrary to the Yale law professor's claims, contrary to the New York Times opinion, the law in America supports the president's suggestion that he will declare a national emergency and use funds appropriated to the Department of Defense for military construction to build the wall. Under Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, the president is, of course, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and he has the power to direct the military at all times. And throughout history, presidents have ordered our military to our southern border without congressional approval for various reasons, including to secure the border, protect Americans conducting trade with Mexico, and to punish Mexican banditos, which President Trump would refer to today as bad hombres. And our military has built several fortifications along the Rio Grande in the past, starting from 100-plus years ago. In 1976, Congress passed the National Emergency Act, authorizing the president to declare a national emergency and to undertake military construction projects and use funds already appropriated to pay for those emergency military construction projects. Now, I just checked, and Congress has appropriated more than $10 billion for military construction projects in fiscal year 2019. So the president can use those funds and any funds from previous years that are still unobligated to build the wall. What's a national emergency? We'll talk about that after we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to the Marc Scaringi Show. Stay tuned.
Now, more of Marc Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. We're talking today about the government shutdown, the border wall, the funding crisis, and whether or not the president has the authority to declare a national emergency and use certain funds already appropriated to the Department of Defense for military construction projects to use those monies to have another military construction project, and that is the border wall. And I'm reading through my opening statement, if you will, my op-ed on this week's Penn Live and the Harrisburg Patriot News, where you can find it. And then we'll open up the phone lines and we'll hear the response from our listeners as to whether or not they think the president has the authority to declare the national emergency and whether they think the president should do it, even if he does have the authority. He doesn't have to do it, but let's hear your thoughts. As soon as I finish with the opening statement, you can call in 717-540-0580 and let me know what you think. So we're talking about what is a national emergency. And apparently it's whatever the president says it is. We're still under President Obama's national emergency to combat swine flu. I don't know if any of my listeners knew that, but we're fighting very, very hard today from a national emergency perspective, combating that swine flu. President Obama thought that was sufficient enough to declare a national emergency. We're also under an existing state of emergency to combat terrorism, of course, as a result of 9/11. And there are several documented cases, by the way, of terrorists crossing our southern border. Now, the situation at the U.S.-Mexican border is a crisis, in my view. Last November, illegal border crossings, this is just a couple of months ago, illegal border crossings reached 51,856 people illegally attempted to cross our southern border. And just turn on your television and you'll see news reports of hundreds of migrants recently trying to storm our border. As you know, many broke through that dilapidated fence near San Diego. And over the years, some who have illegally crossed our border from Mexico have committed heinous crimes here in the United States, including the killings of Kate Steinle, Molly Tibbetts, and Ronil Singh that have garnered a lot of attention from President Trump and Republicans, not so much from the media, because it goes against their narrative. In any event, a wall, in my view, will reduce illegal border crossings. And remember, several countries around the world, including Norway, Spain, and Austria, well, they're putting up border barriers to stop illegal migration. And so the United States Department of Defense, it can do it here. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the National Guard, well, they've already performed a significant amount of construction on the U.S. border fence. And both agencies are under the authority of the Department of Defense. The Corps has already been assessing the various prototypes for the wall submitted to it by the Trump administration. So this matter is really queued up and ready for the president to make the declaration, direct that money already appropriated for military construction projects be used, and build the wall. The president can continue to negotiate with Congress on new funding, but in the meantime, he can act now to make America safe. So there you have it. There's the opening statement, and call in at 717-540-0580 and tell me whether I'm right or wrong. Does the president have the authority under the National Emergencies Act to declare a national emergency and use these funds already appropriated for military construction to build the wall? Call in, let me know what you think. But even if he has the authority, do you think the president should do it? Or do you think the president should continue to negotiate with the Speaker of the House and the Senate Minority Leaders to see if he can get them to budge on their flat refusal to appropriate the money the president's requesting? So let me know, 717-540-0580. There have been some new developments, of course. The president said yesterday that he would not declare a national emergency right now. And he's been kind of talking with the media about this, and obviously the president is negotiating with the Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate. He's doing it directly in direct consultations with them in the White House in the Situation Room, but he's also doing it through the media. And he's talking about the fact that if they don't give him the money, that he'll declare the national emergency and do it anyway. Sometimes he talks about he's going to do it right away, right now. As recently as yesterday, he's going to hold off. He's not going to do it right now. He's going to continue to see if he can get congressional leaders to appropriate the monies he needs. The president declared yesterday that declaring the national emergency is an easy solution. He can do it right now. He can do it very quickly, he said during a White House event on border security. He said, I have the absolute right to do it, but I'm not going to do it so fast because this is something Congress should do. Now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, of course, mocked the president as she told reporters it was up to the president to make the next move. Speaker Pelosi said, let's give him time to think it through. Think. Did I say think, she said. There, the Speaker of the House is mocking the president, trying to make it appear that he doesn't think or that he doesn't think through his tactics or his strategies. I wonder if the media will jump all over the Speaker of the House for mocking the president's thoughts and thought process. I highly doubt that. But rest assured, this president, in my view, is winning this fight. And of course, the entire media will say he's not. Democrats will say he's not. The Republican establishment and never-Trumpers will say he's not. But I think he is. This is, to me, it's a very common sense problem. It's a very common sense solution to a very obvious problem. If you just turn on the news, you will see images of all kinds of numbers of migrants or individuals south of the border who are making their way across our very porous border one way or another. It's been going on since time immemorial, since the founding of our country and the founding of Mexico and the various border wars we fought with Mexico many, many years ago. It's obvious. There's no question that it's happening. And it's obvious that a wall will prevent a good deal of it. So I think the average person in America can reach a very common sense conclusion that we have a problem with people illegally crossing our border, and not just at the port of entry, but in all those places across our 2,000-mile-long border with Mexico where we don't have any barriers, and there are significant places on that border where we don't have any barriers at all. And you just turn on the television, just Google it, and you'll see people crossing those barren deserts in New Mexico and Arizona where there are no walls. It's as obvious as the night follows day. And to have a large, well-constructed border fence or wall there will obviously reduce the number of illegal crossings. I don't know how anybody can reasonably question that conclusion. Well, let's open the phone lines and we'll take some calls. You can call in 717-540-0580. We'll take a call from Lance. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Yes, well, Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great. What do you think the president has the authority to declare a national emergency and start building that wall?
Well, let me answer your question with a question. I just want to know, where did the $150 billion come from that Obama flew into Iran? Like, how was that appropriated in cash on a plane to seal the Iranian deal? Now, Trump's asking for, what, $5.7 billion? Now, where did the $150 billion in cash come from? Who appropriated that, and where did that money come from to give to Iran while they're making, IEDs to blow up our troops in Iraq? That's what I want to know.
Well, that's a very good point, and I'm going to venture an answer, and then I'll have to fact check myself after the show. But I think those monies you're talking about, the $150 billion that President Obama sent on a plane
in cash
to Iran, I think those monies came from the 1979 during the hostage crisis, when the United States confiscated Iranian assets, Iranian financial assets held in U.S. banking institutions. I think that's the origin for that, but I'll have to fact check myself, or maybe you know the answer.
No, actually, I don't. I wish I did, but who approved that? I mean, did he take it upon himself to release those funds? Maybe he has the authority to do that. I don't know. But $150 billion, to give to a country which is a major sponsor of terror, and then you can't come up with, $5.7 billion to build a border wall. I have one other more point to make. Anyone that wants to have these open borders with Mexico, those people are chipping in front of people that are being law-abiding from other countries that want to enter this country. So I have an idea. Let's have them wear special colored shirts when they go to an amusement park, and then anyone can just chip in front of the line of those people. So when they're standing in line to get in a ride or any line whatsoever, they have to wear a special colored shirt if they're so proud of their opinion, and let anyone just jump right in front of them, and their family can just wait and wait and wait while my family and other families go on a ride and enjoy themselves.
Oh, that would cause probably riots
exactly.
At Disney and Hershey Park, for example. But Lance, thanks for the call. I appreciate.
Well, one more thing. If fences don't work, why don't we remove the fence around Hershey Park then too? They have a fence around there, as does Dorney Park. If they don't work, let's remove all fences from even these high-cost developments that these senators and congressmen live in. I'm sure they're gated communities. Let's remove the gates, and we'll have no walls at all. How's that?
Another excellent point, and of course, former President Barack Obama is now living in Washington D.C. in a very wealthy section of that city, and you can't even drive or walk onto the block where his house is located to even see the wall that has been constructed to protect President Obama and his family.
Right. I guess his family have there's no chance of ever getting assaulted or shot like that poor Kate Stanley on a pier by an illegal alien. So I guess that's why he's not too passionate about the matter. But us people in the middle, just like, well, be patient. Hopefully Trump will win this, which is to me the common sense fight. But I appreciate your time so much. Thank you.
Lance, thanks for calling. Appreciate that. And Lance makes a good point, and that is, where did President Obama get the authority to send over $150 billion to our Iranian friends? I think those monies come from, as I stated earlier, from the time period during the Iranian hostage crisis, when our government seized Iranian financial assets held in U.S. banking institutions. I think that might be the origin, but I'm going to have to do some homework now and fact check myself. We're talking about the border crisis, the government shutdown, and whether or not the president has the authority to declare a national emergency and build that wall. So if you'd like to call in, 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back right after this.
Let's get back to the Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. Today we're talking about the shutdown of the government, the border wall and the funding crisis, and President Trump at odds with Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer. President demanding $5.7 billion to fund his wall. Democratic leadership saying no way, calling the law ineffective, a waste, immoral, according to Nancy Pelosi. And I've read my opening statement that the president does have the authority under the National Emergencies Act to declare a national emergency and use funds previously appropriated for the purposes of military construction projects, to use those funds to perform a grand military construction project, and that is a border wall between the United States and Mexico. And after all, isn't that what the United States military is supposed to do? Ultimately, isn't it supposed to defend our borders? One would think that makes perfect sense for the military to stand on our border. Perhaps we can remove some of our U.S. military troops that are stationed in about 150 countries around the world, bring them home, and put them on the U.S. border. That seems to be the proper place for United States soldiers in a republic, that they defend the borders of that republic, as opposed to defending the borders of countries around the world. But we'll open the phone lines and we'll take some calls. You're listening to the Marc Scaringi Show. You can call in 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. We have Joe from Camp Hill. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Hello, Mark. Trump has the right and, of course, the moral obligation to build the wall. Walls work. That's why the Democrats don't want a wall. I have a timely example. There's a wall that was just completed in the Jerusalem area in Israel, Iraq 4370. It has just opened for Jewish people only. It connects the Israeli settlements to Route 1, the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway. It's divided in the middle by a high border wall, which keeps out the Palestinians who have lived there since the beginning of history. And the Democrats have this lofty moral opposition to walls. In Israel, the Jews are preventing non-Jews from entering Jerusalem. Compare this to what we have in the United States, where we're trying to protect ourselves from an invasion of illegal aliens. The Democrats have lost their edge with the working class voter, and they want the illegals simply for their voting bloc. The Dems want power and will do anything to acquire it. It's not what you say, it is what you do. Your actions speak louder than your words. If the illegal aliens were likely Republican voters, the Dems would support a 100-foot wall with barbed wire on top of it. That's my comment.
Well, thank you, Joe from Camp Hill. Appreciate your comment, and that is true. The Israelis have a border wall. The Austrians are building a border wall. The Norwegians, who are friends on the left and our democratic socialist friends, always talk about Norway as a role model for what the United States of America should look like and the policies that we should incorporate here in the United States. But Norway, of all places, is building a wall with the express purpose of deterring illegal migration into Norway. Spain has a very large fence or wall protecting its enclave on the North African continent. So the Spanish, the Austrians, the Israelis, they all have walls, and there are many other countries that have walls. And so the question is, are those walls immoral? Because Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has stated that a wall on our southern border, which, by the way, she voted for in 2006, so it's odd, she voted for the border fence that we have on the western side, the San Diego side of the border. Nancy Pelosi voted for that fence and voted to appropriate monies to build that fence, but now she's calling it immoral. So ironic, yes, and the caller, I think, correctly points out that our friends in the Democratic Party are very happy with open borders and unlimited migration into our country, because that is the future of the Democratic Party. That's their voting base that they're bringing into our country. Recent immigrants who gain the U.S. citizenship and the right to vote overwhelmingly Democratic, and so this is how they solidify their voting base, and this is how they're going to win elections in the future. You can see Texas itself, which has traditionally been the reddest of red states, it's starting to turn. It's starting to become purple, and that's because of immigration, among other reasons, but that's certainly a leading reason. We'll open up the phone lines. We'll take some more calls. 717-540-0580. It's 717-540-0580. You can call in and comment on the issue of the day, which is, does President Trump have the authority to declare a national emergency and build a wall on our southern border? We'll talk to Richard from Mechanicsburg. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Hi there. I imagine you have callers waiting, so I'll get right to the point. I believe not only does he have the authority, he has the absolute obligation, as several other presidents have had the obligation and failed. The president takes a specific and precise oath of office. Your listeners can look up, Google will work, even though it gives strange results, it'll work. Look up the presidential oath of office, congressional oath of office, and the oath of office for judges. If you look those up and read them, they're quite clear and precise. Then let's go to Article 4, Section 4. The United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. So if the government, be it the president, the Congress, whoever, has failed to protect the states against invasion, the states who you know which are getting invaded, they have failed in their office. So then you want to look up the violation of your oath of office, because all those people just took their oath of office, so it should be fresh in their mind. They all have a copy of the Constitution, I'm sure, so it should be fresh in their mind. And those people we're seeing on the TV shows, blathering on about, did you take an oath of office in the United States for the people that elected you from the United States, or are you taking an oath of office to protect people not from the United States? Dang good question. And then I'm looking forward to sometime in the future a treatise from you on the quo warranto, because all of that would apply to these oath violators.
Well, Richard from Mechanicsburg, thanks for calling. Appreciate having the benefit of your views. Very well said, and we'll have to reserve for a future broadcast the issue of quo warranto. But today and you've correctly pointed out that the federal government certainly has the constitutional duty to protect the borders of our country, and you name a part of the Constitution that requires the federal government to protect our states from invasion. No question about that. And so I think you're right on point with the authority of the federal government. President Trump is commander-in-chief. According to Article 2, he has the power to direct the military at all times. And this Yale law professor who we were discussing earlier in the broadcast, trying to confuse the issue and bringing up the old Posse Comitatus Act of the 1800s, which was put into place during Reconstruction in the South, namely because the United States military was being used by the presidents, the Republican presidents at the time, to ensure that our friends, our Democrat friends in the South, did not continue to discriminate against recently freed slaves. And so there was an effort in Congress to kind of restrain the ability of the president to use the United States military to enforce domestic law. And so our friends on the left are using that statute as grounds or as reasons why President Trump should not be permitted to build a wall, but it's apples and oranges. The president is not enforcing domestic law when he's using a soldier to build a wall. So we'll open up the phone lines. We'll take another quick call before we go to commercial break. Jeff from York, you're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Yeah. You mentioned that the Coast Guard is already authorized to protect the borders of the United States. The Rio Grande has water in it. Why not use the Coast Guard to build the wall? They're already authorized.
That's a great point, Jeff from York. Thanks. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we're going to have to look into that excellent point that Jeff from York makes, and that's correct. Congress has already authorized the Coast Guard to enforce domestic law in U.S. waters. So we'll have to find out if the authority of the Coast Guard can
be extended to the Rio Grande.
Be extended to the Rio Grande. Thanks, Jeff, from York. Appreciate that call. We're going to take a brief commercial break. You're listening to the Marc Scaringi Show. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Now back to the Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking about the border wall funding crisis, the government shutdown, President Trump and Democratic leaders at loggerheads over the issue of funding the president's desire to build a wall on our southern border. The president has requested $5.7 billion. Democratic leaders are saying no way. Border wall is ineffective. It's a waste. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has referred to the border wall as an immorality, which is odd considering she voted for the border wall that we have in place now, the 700-mile fence on the San Diego area of the border, but now it's an immorality. We're seeing countries around the world. We had a caller remind us of the border wall in the state of Israel, that the Israelis have a border wall in place. The Spanish, the Austrians, the Norwegians, and many others around the world are building walls to keep out those individuals they don't want in their country, or at least they don't want unlawfully enter their country. And so that's the state of the world, is that many countries are building walls, but in our country we can't seem to be able to do it. Yet we have an obvious crisis on our southern border. In November of last year, 51,000 individuals were caught illegally crossing our southern border. There's no question we have, in my mind, that we have a border crisis, and we're talking about options the president has. The president has stated he can declare a national emergency and use funds already appropriated to the Department of Defense that have not yet been obligated for military construction projects. He can use those funds. and send the United States military down to the border and give them the instruction and the order to build a wall. That has made our friends on the left apoplectic. They're aghast that the president would think that he has the authority to do so, even though it's right in the National Emergencies Act. And President Obama has declared national emergencies, including one for the swine flu, which I'm not quite sure is as much of a national emergency as tens of thousands of illegals illegally crossing our border on a monthly basis, which seems to be the situation we're confronted with today. Who knows who those people are? There are documented cases of terrorists crossing our southern border. It is a problem. This country was struck horribly on 9/11 by foreign peoples who came to our country with the intent to do catastrophic harm to the American people because of their ideology. And you know, we have the TSA at every airport in America. We've got long lines of American citizens who want to get on a plane and fly from one U.S. city to another, and they've got to go through all kinds of security to ensure they're not a threat to the other passengers on the plane. But yet we have large swaths of our southern border that are completely open. There's no barrier. There's no wall of any kind. And we have thousands and thousands and thousands of people. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they're from. We don't know what their intentions are. We don't know what their backgrounds are. They just come into our country. And there is an awful lot of crime in America committed by individuals who came into our country illegally. And we don't have the time to discuss that matter in detail today, but I'm planning on doing that probably next week or the week after, where I will reveal the great lie that so many in our media today are promulgating or propagating, which is that the percentage of crime between the American people, between U.S. citizens, and those who have immigrated to our country, either legally or illegally, the media will tell us that immigrant crime is at a much lower percentage to the immigrant population than crime involving U.S. citizens. And that is a canard. And I've done the research, and we'll have a broadcast about that where I will show you, based upon the data we have through the federal prison system, just how high the percentage of federal prison inmates is comprised of aliens, individuals who are not U.S. citizens. So we'll talk about that in the future broadcast. But we've heard from our callers today. We've heard from our listeners. They've called in, and we've had one caller who has suggested that because there is already a congressional act authorizing the United States Coast Guard under the National Emergencies Act to enforce domestic law on U.S. waters, and should that include the Rio Grande, which is, I would think, half of it, part of it is a U.S. water. We'll have to, maybe we share the Rio Grande with Mexico. Maybe we own up to the middle of the river, and the Mexicans own up to the middle of their side of the river. We'll have to take a look at that issue in a little more detail. But the United States Coast Guard and its predecessor entity, they have been involved in United States and Mexican border conflicts and wars in the past. Many years ago, the predecessor to the United States Coast Guard was involved in skirmishing along our southern border. So we'll have to take a look and see if we can answer that question. But in the meantime, we'll open up the phone lines. We'll take some additional calls. If you'd like to call in and comment on the issue of the day, which is this government shutdown, the crisis on our southern border, the stalemate between the president and Democratic leaders in the United States Congress regarding funding for the border wall. You're welcome to do so. Call in 717-540-0580. That's 540-0580. We have Roosevelt from Steelton. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, look, you just said something about 9/11. If it was so important, Bush should have closed the border, southern border, and built a wall after 9/11. He shut down the air traffic control. We was actually terrorized and invaded then. If there was any time that you wanted to do that, that would have been the time to do that. And since it's been about 10 or so years since then, I don't see where the threat is all that great that you needed it now, that you wouldn't have needed it anymore back then. So back then was the window that I think you would have had the most support of the American people to do such a thing, and Republicans wasn't talking about do the wall then. So why didn't they do it back then if it was that important? This issue has been going on since Reagan.
Well, Roosevelt, I think you make an excellent point, and I think the reason why Republicans around the time of 9/11, and of course it was President George W. Bush who was in the Oval Office at the time, they were focused on the country of origin of the 9/11 hijackers. Of course, was Saudi Arabia, and so that was their focus. And then they got sidetracked and went into Iraq. In my view, that was the wrong decision at the time. But they just weren't focused on the possibility of terrorists or wannabe terrorists crossing our open southern border at the time. So I think I'm not so sure how the public would have reacted had President Bush used his national emergency declaration to send the military to our southern border.
I think the nation would have reacted good, because after all, Ronald Reagan had put immigration policies. You know, a lot of presidents had tackled it. And if he'd have said, look, I'm doing this on the southern border to prevent future terrorists to get in, at that time, the nation would have went for it.
Hey, I think you're right, Roosevelt. I really do. I mean, the president had the country behind him. The country got his back. And I think he made a colossal mistake when he went after Saddam Hussein and I think destroyed and ruined a real good opportunity to do actual good for our country, to make our country more secure. And one way would have been to build a wall on that southern border to ensure that terrorists can't get across. But I thank you for your call. I think you're right on point. That's Roosevelt from Steelton. Thanks for calling in. I'm going to take one other quick call. Ron from Harrisburg, you're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Hi, Mark. How are you today?
I'm great. Quickly, what do you think the president has the authority to declare the national emergency and build the wall?
Yes, I do. And I'd like to make a brief comment. What's interesting is so many people coming into this country now. And one of the reasons, several, which I'm sure you know, but I'm on the radio, so I just wanted to express myself, that a couple of the reasons why people want to come here is, first of all, historically, we are there's the expression democratic republic. That's fairly close to what we are. We're also a free market capitalist country, but we've been, we're not as free market capitalist as we used to be, but we're certainly better than just about anywhere. We have an economy that thrives. It has its ups and downs, and right now we're going up better than they were the last, say, 10 years or so. And so people see these opportunities. They want to get out of here. They want to come here, and they want to get out of where they are. I think the key, in my opinion, is get the international, like the United Nations and the other organizations.
Hey, Ron, I got to cut you off. I'm so sorry. I apologize. I'm just out of time today. Call back next week. I'm sure we'll be talking about this same issue. We seem to talk about it week by week by week. It is the most important issue of the day. The government is shut down. It doesn't look like there's any sign that it's going to be reopened in the near future. Well, thanks for listening to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. Have a great weekend.